Now, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you can hear everything just fine and dandy. Please let us know immediately if you can't. But hello, welcome. I'm Suzanne, brand manager at Fellow Traveler, and today I am joined by some really cool, shiny people. Everybody wave hello.
Hello.
Everybody, I am today joined by some lovely people from Chance Agency, the developers who are making NeoCab at this time, this week. Actually, specifically, can't talk anymore about that, redacted. Can you guys all go around starting with Patrick and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you are to NeoCab?
Cool. Yeah, my name's Patrick. I am the creative lead on this project. Before that, I worked on Firewatch as a gameplay programmer and tools programmer. And I was one of the first people to start the project and build out the team. And I'm just so excited to finally start sharing everything that we've been working on for the past 2 years, basically. Couldn't be more excited to answer your questions.
Awesome. Paula, tell us who you are.
Hello, I am Paula, that is correct. I am the story editor for NeoCab, and so that means I work really closely with Patrick to develop the overall narrative of the game and manage a team of really incredible writers. It's been a wonderful 2 years. It's been really challenging. I feel like we have a really unique story structure that I'm really excited to share with everyone and talk about today.
Yay. And Vincent, your turn.
Great. Well, my name is Vincent, and I am the art director on the game. And so that means I design all the characters and work with the art team on the environments and just have designed the general overall look and feel and mood of the game. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it and start sharing it more information with people. And that's it, I guess.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Andrew.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm one of the programmers on the project. I mostly do the gameplay systems, animation, and I write one of the characters on the project, and sort of do a little bit of everything.
Are you allowed to say which character?
No.
Okay. Everybody would, Suzanne, don't ask that question. Okay. Well, yes. Well, we have a lot of you here today, but how big is the Chance Agency team as a whole?
Oh gosh, there's so many hands that touch the project in one way or another. In terms of people who like show up every day of the week, we're 7, I would say. And in terms of everybody who has contributed something to the game, in some way or another, including music, sound effects, custom animation, custom designs, signs in the background, I'd say we're about 12, 13, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's a big, actually, yeah, maybe even more. Yeah, probably more like 13 now.
I think it's more like 16, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. But not like, we have a lot of people that will come in and, sort of like parachute in and help us out with a very specific thing.
Yeah.
Our core team is fairly small, and so like kind of to Andrew's point, a lot of us wear so many different hats and doing so many different things that we just may not have one thing in our skill set, like a 3D rigger or an environment artist or a specific type of writer for story. So we've been really lucky to be able to like find people who want to contribute to the game and who can join our little team for a brief period of time. So I think if we counted it out, Patrick, it'd probably be about.
No, you're right. I was just thinking about the expanded writing team with 2D art, 3D art, 3D animation.
Some of the environment contractors we've worked with on the art side, it might be about that number. It's wild.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's a pretty big overall team. But, I mean, you guys are, do all of you work remotely?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then...
in different time zones as well.
Right?
We're all very lonely.
Yeah.
We have each other.
My
Yes.
friends live on my computer now.
I can sympathize with this. Fellow Traveler team has a similar situation. Timeanddate.com is my new favorite website for figuring
that's
out
good. Yeah.
when
That's
on
really
Earth
good.
time zones are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's truly wild when we try to do a meeting and we've literally got someone in London, New Jersey, LA, and Indonesia that happened once.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it's enough to
Oh,
break the
yeah.
brain. Yeah.
Yeah, we have an animator, a 3D animator that we worked with from Australia. Yeah, thankfully a good chunk of us are on Pacific time zone, so that helps a little bit. But it's still, yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it can make things complicated. It's totally doable. Do you guys have any things that you like to do to keep everybody synced on what's going on, to just make meetings actually happen?
I think the main thing is like we have at least one meeting every day where the full timers always get together. It's like a morning scrum in literally any other form of game production. But yeah, we started doing that about what was it, Patrick? Like 4 or 5 months in.
Yeah.
And it really helped because then it helped us all feel like one big team rather than as like a group of people working on a thing. Just that like scrums can get kind of boring, but it's just nice to see everyone's face and have some chit chat in the morning. And then we have various meetings and other things depending on which discipline needs it at the time.
Yeah.
We've actually been pretty good about staying in constant contact. I would say, yeah. It's been good.
Slack is like utterly critical to what we do. When we're writing together, we'll have a Google Doc open, and being able to see everyone's cursor while we're like collaboratively working on a design doc or a script is huge. And then recently we discovered in Discord that one person can DJ for the whole room, and that's been awesome for just
that's cool.
that like office feel. We've only done it a couple times, but if multiple people are working together, having one person like set the playlist is a great way to like feel like you're all in the same space, same vibe.
Yeah, this is the vibe of today.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll just like leave a screen share open, even if we're working on different things, just to sort of, feel that other person's presence, or like be able to just kind of rubber duck things in case you can't figure something out.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's been really great to kind of like create those bonds together.
Yeah.
It's like creating a co-working vibe in the comfort of your own homes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing we did on the writing side is one of the challenges is that we have a singular protagonist for our game who narrates in first person. So her voice has to be consistent. And we have a team of numerous writers who all live in different locations and time zones. So getting everyone to coalesce around her voice was a challenge. And so we did some exercises that I worry would be a little cheesy, but I think they were actually fun, like kind of like summer camp exercises where we did like an exquisite corpse where everybody on the writing team wrote a part of a story, and then we all just kind of passed it along to try and get continuity between his voice, and we all like collaborated on some of her memories, creating this character together. So I think that was the challenge for me. The biggest one with having the team be remote is just like, how do you get everyone to inhabit the character in the same way, and then finding ways to collaborate on something that will get everyone's mind coalesced.
That's awesome. It's really kind of like using improv almost.
Yeah, I thought about those techniques a lot, like theater stuff where you talk about like what part of your background informs how you're performing this character, getting people to do exercises like that.
Yeah. Here. I actually, I've done things for brainstorming sessions and things like that. I have actually pulled in real improv games, and it's a great way to, it makes sense, especially when you all need to mind meld and become one character. But is there a drive to try to make Lena, the main character, try to make her all a little bit of each of you, like there's a piece of you each within her, or is it more about all of you molding to become Lena?
Ideally it's both, but I think in a perfect world, the writer, there's kind of an invisible line between like where the writer is bringing in many of their own memories, and like in any writer's room we have moments where people say like, oh well, here's something that happened in my childhood. I think like just today I told like a story, we were sharing some stories, and that comes up to inform Lena. But Lena is very different, I think, also from everybody on the writing team. And so sometimes we can talk about how we're so different from Lena because we would never respond that way, and it helps crystallize her. So I think it's actually a mix of both, but it probably always starts with pinging your own personality off of the character and sharing that with the other people in the room.
That's really cool.
Appearing.
Yeah. Speaking of Lena, who I as a player am becoming very attached to, where did the inspiration for her, was there any one thing that made anyone on the writing staff or even just early in the creative process come up with her as a character?
That's a really good question. I feel like in many ways she evolved almost before we knew it. Like the germ of her, like I heard this like George R. R. Martin quote recently that totally like reminded me of what we do. She's like, there's like build it out, and gardeners are more like planting a lot of ideas and sort of seeing how they grow and then cutting them down, etc. And I feel like we've been gardeners on this project from the very beginning, and like all the writers have put some of themselves into the character. Vincent, I feel like, added a lot. As soon as he started sketching, that crystallized a lot of things about Lena's age, her background, even the city. I don't know, like Lisa could probably speak to that better, but I do feel like she kind of like started as a seed and then like rolled downhill, and you know what I mean? There was no like moment.
Yeah, it took a while, her development. We knew we wanted it to be I think early on we knew we wanted it to be a female protagonist and a person of color as well, partly because of the setting and the opportunities that it presented to us, and also because so we can have a character that represented a different perspective, right? Our main character would be sort of the expected person in sort of a cyberpunk style, futuristic world. I'm from Southern California. That's where I'm at now, and I grew up around. There's a huge Mexican American population here. It's my background as well, and so when we started talking about the qualities of what made Lena who she was, there were qualities that I noticed in like my cousins and my friends who are Mexican American. Just a particular type of empathy, yet strength and toughness. That I just saw growing up a lot through a lot of the members of my family. And so it just sort of made sense. It's almost like is a very cheesy poetic artist way of saying it, but like Michelangelo used to describe that. He described that he didn't sculpt David, that he found David within marble. And I feel like that's how it felt with Lena, is like we sort of found her along the way. So her design went through a couple of different iterations, but what didn't change a lot from right when we began. I know for me too, I had all this stuff in my head when Patrick introduced me to the project, and I just become friends with another game designer. And the minute I saw her, I was like, oh, like she just had this like Lena vibe about her, and I can't even really quite describe what it was. So I ended up using her as like the initial basis for the character. Just there's something about her attitude and that really affected me, and it was just sort of kismet. That was happening, and then this other thing was happening, and so like I said, it just feels like we kind of found the character rather than made her up. I don't know. At this point, it just feels like she's sort of a real person,
And yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I would just add that I think also Vincent used a quote, and so I'm going to use one too, where there's one of my favorite ones. It's the novelist Charles Baxter. He says, "We take characters we love and we visit their lives with trouble. It's the nature of fiction." And so I think a lot of what we did in figuring out Lena's personality was kind of looking backwards from the requirements of her job and the game and the mechanics. And I think that's where we landed on her being such an empathetic character,
Totally.
and having her sensitivity be not only like her strength, but also like part of the weakness of this character, and like someone who is interfacing with the public all day in this kind of intimate situation where it's just one person in your car and it's conversation night after night. How would she be the best person for this job, and how would this job also like push on her in really compelling ways that would cause this character to like question and change?
That's 100% right. Yeah, I'm remembering now too. Like we were watching a lot of Taxi Cab Confessions season 1, which is an amazing HBO show from 1995. Because it's like our game. And I remember reading. We were just enthralled by the amazing stories from that show. People had no idea they were being filmed, and it was just like human to human, like authenticity. And I remember reading that they interviewed 3,000 New York City cabbies before they found the 3 that they needed. And I remember saying that, like, Lena's got to be one of those people. She's like the ideal cabbie, the person you just immediately open up to and trust and just like tell your story. And yeah, that's such a good point, Paula. That was like very key to, that was like the constraint. Yeah, she had to be that person.
That is really cool. And that empathetic thing ties a lot into one of the ways that you understand Lena in the story, which something that's shown in the trailer is this cool bracelet that she's wearing. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about the feel grid?
We've barely talked about this before. I feel like someone who's not me should talk.
Someone who
I didn't feel different.
I could have built the coach.
Yeah, so
Yeah, because I don't like that.
It's so okay. So it's based on actual theory of like actual emotional theory, where you're kind of mapping out your emotional space in a sort of circle where we have one axis where it's hot and cold, and one axis where it's positive and negative. And we wanted to kind of represent Lena's emotional journey in the game. And we wanted a way to do this that wasn't super simplified and wasn't like cheesy, where you're just like, oh, I'm going to be bad, or oh, I'm going to be good. Where we wanted something that was a little bit more nuanced than that, but still something that was easy to understand. So that's sort of how we got to this spot.
Can I add something to that, Andrew?
Sure.
So like basically like Lena's bracelet will illuminate different colors and give you indications on where she is on that spectrum.
Right.
And it's important for us that we didn't want to denote that something is like good versus evil, or like you're playing the game right versus wrong. We wanted to educate you on what those states of being are and let you decide if that's where you want Lena to be or not. And the states can be expressed in terms of like, if you're red, you're more up and you might be angry, but you also might be anxious. You're sort of feeling the same things in your body, because that's what the technology is meant to do, is to read how your body is reacting, not necessarily to tell you what the emotion is. Whereas versus red, you would be maybe something like either green, where you maybe be sort of calm or serene, or maybe even lazy might fit on that spectrum too. Something that's just the diametric opposite from being so hyped up. And so the colors will change and let you know where Lena is, and that affects the things that Lena can say. That's sort of the very gamey, practical way of how it affects the gameplay.
Yeah.
But it's also not like a system in like Red Dead or Mass Effect, where it's like, oh, if you're good, then you're gonna go all the way down to good, and then you kind of work your way back to bad, like you're gonna stay in those zones for a long time. It's a thing, like, it was really important for us that it felt true to real emotions, which can go up and down. So Lena can begin and end her day in a happy state and generally be a happy person. But if she has a couple of sad rides in a row, like, she's not going to be completely up because she's empathetic, and it's not, it would be completely inhuman to not like feel like differences in your emotions through the day. So it's been an interesting challenge to like make sure that gets represented properly and that like it reads clearly. But it's getting pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Tuning it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it also gives us like another tool to build tension in the game, because you may be interacting with a passenger who you get the sense that like they're asking something of you to get a good rating. So you may be like, oh, okay, like maybe if I respond in a certain way, I'll please them, but then that may affect me emotionally in a certain way that maybe I don't want to.
Yeah.
And then the consequences of that may shape the way in which you finish that ride or the rest of the story.
Yep. We've all had that circumstance where you're like, I could start a fight right now, but would it really benefit me?
Yeah.
Right.
And initially we were just thinking you would just move from zone to zone. There are like about 4 different zones that you can be within in terms of just like the way it reads on the field grid. But now we've started to add intensity levels to that as well. So now it's not just like, oh, I'm in like this like angry or calm state. Like I am in these states in increasing levels of intensity. And that actually is starting to feel really interesting because now it feels like, oh, I might be sort of like way too far. It's okay for me to be angry right now and have some angry responses, but if I get 2 more clicks in, it's going to be way harder to get Lena out of that.
Right.
And that might not affect this ride, but it might certainly affect the next ride.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is like trying to just have that like memory of like the character from ride to ride. It's not like, oh, you're having individual rides. It's like you're playing rides through like full days, like a string of like events. So
Yeah.
I think it helps tie things together pretty well.
Yeah, like you're one whole person. This
Yeah.
whole day.
Right. You have limits. You can't just be nice all the time. Like people will push you, they'll test you. Sometimes anger is an appropriate emotion.
Yeah.
Sometimes letting it slide is the right thing. Sometimes you're too angry to let it slide and you're just gonna pop off and say something you regret later. Yeah, it really makes it, we hope that it makes your choices feel, even the tiny choices in the middle of a ride really feel impactful. And the amount that we branch on this emotion in terms of what Lena is able to say, what she sometimes says without you choosing to, because of this rich emotional spectrum. Every playthrough is going to be very unique.
Yeah. It's a very human game, which of course seems to be kind of the point, and it's but at the same time, I'm gonna appropriate a question that Ray in Mixer Chat asked, because I think it applies here, that when you're thinking about why Lena does what she does, how much of that stems from what is lost in human interaction with the increasing automation of trades and services?
I've got a quick answer on deck.
Go ahead.
I'll just jump in. I think it's an interest. That's one of our takes on the future that we feel like was underrepresented. Most stuff talking about AI presumes that, like Detroit Become Human or games like Westworld presumes like we're about to be in a place where robots start talking like humans, and the big struggle is like, will you treat robots with the same respect we should treat humans? And what we actually see is more like humans treating each other like robots, or trying to cut humans out of the equation altogether, right? With you maybe used to have a relationship with your barista at the corner coffee shop. That person might be a robot in 10 years. Yeah. Maybe your cab driver who you could unload the story of your life, that ideal cab driver, is just an empty car ferrying you around. I come from Silicon Valley, Andrew does as well. We know that that's kind of the mission, is to like cut humans out in a lot of cases. And so, for us, like the feel grid and the identity of Lena as one of the last human drivers is about that story, about like what's lost when we try to replace the humans around us with systems and intelligences that aren't very human at all.
Yeah.
Awesome. I have too many feels, and there's a lot of other things that I want to talk about, but it would be too soon. Too much too soon. But thinking also about this game has a really, really strong art style and a very much of its own look. Going back to a second about, we were talking about what it's like to have a team all spread out and a lot of people. How did that affect the art design and how the animation all came together?
That is a good question. How did it affect the art style? It's sort of a good and a bad, I think, because and only from a process standpoint, I think. We're a pretty small team. I mean, my core art team is myself and our tech artist / UI artist, Laura Sly, and our environment modeler, Lisa Fleck. And so, and we have, I'm missing out a bunch of names of contractors, branding people, a lot of people have helped us with this game. But the nice thing about doing that is it's one hard thing to do from an art direction standpoint when you work with bigger teams is keeping everybody on the same page and making sure that you're all sort of speaking in the same voice. Very similar to what Paula was saying about writing. And so she's sort of run that group as like a writer's room where you all have sort of one big output at the end, and characters definitely have a singular voice. With art, it's trickier because the art style comes from a very personal art style of my own. It's the way that I sort of naturally have been drawing people for a long time. I worked at Disney for a lot of years, and I worked in more of a cartoony style, but I've always gone to figure drawing and done portraits of people, and it's always been in this style. It was actually that I had done a series of portraits of some coworkers, and Patrick had seen them because we had mutual friends, and that's what sort of spurred our conversation about starting to work together. Because I think the thing Patrick literally said was like, what if our characters could look like this? And I was like, that sounds cool. Because it wasn't like somebody was asking me to do, draw in a different style. It was like something that was very, very native to what I did. So back to what I was saying about the small team size, what's great about that is that like I literally design all the characters. And so, so it all sort of feels unified because I'm the one doing it and it comes from my own style. However, to accomplish it technically, I work very closely with, in particular, Laura, who is a fantastic UI UX artist, but then has become a tech artist on our game. And we work back and forth on the characters. I'll prep the assets and then have her rig them, and then we co-animate them together. And there's like, we've developed a real back and forth, but it's pretty firmly lined up along divisions of different labor. So like I'm relying on Laura to like make sure that the characters can like move and animate, and then do the first passive animations, and then I kind of come in at the end and help finish things out. So it's sort of like, it really takes both of us. Since, in any given day, I'm either working on a character design or prepping the character assets or animating the character or putting it into Unity or adding some of the cool effects on top of it. Meanwhile, Laura is either putting the skeleton on the character, applying all the animations, doing all the testing. So it's like we've become sort of like a little unit that just like really crews up and has to work on it together. I don't know if that's, I don't know how to express how that's affected the art style of the game, other than to say it just like there's so few people working on like the core visual look of it that it's just a lot easier to maintain.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
It sounds very collaborative altogether.
It is. Yes, dog, it is.
They agree with my salient point.
The puppies need to know, is it a collaborative experience? It's very much so. I mean, it has to be. I think with art, it's a little bit different than writing because, I think I don't necessarily want to speak for the writing staff, but my assumption has always been that different writers' strengths rely in different areas, and artists as well, except our strengths tend to rely very strictly along discipline lines. Like I have more of a penchant for drawing characters, and I can do environments, but it's not my strongest suit. So that's why I have Lisa, because that's what she does. And then UI as well. Like I've done a lot of UI on games, but I never felt the best at it. And so having Laura is such a godsend because she's so passionate about it. And in addition, passionate about, a lot of the technical sides of making a character that I'm not necessarily as excited about. And so it just sort of works out. Like we've just created this really nice dynamic between the three of us constantly working together. And then it's great because anyone I want to bring in now, the style is sort of set, and it's like they're basically working in my style. And then that's a simpler task of just teaching somebody how I do things, or just helping them restyle it to the way that I work.
Yeah. I remember that happening in the story too. Like that moment where we went from always discussing and arguing about how, like how long are our lines? What does Lena's voice sound like? Like how much do we use narration, to that point where we could bring new people on and say, make yours like mine. Like we like this, like do it more like this.
Yeah, and that just takes a lot of trial and error, I assume, on the writing side, right, Paula?
Yes, it did. Like it takes a lot of exploration in terms of like how do it's just like a process of reduction. Like Lena could be all of the things, and then she was slowly like draft after draft becoming like a much more narrow individual character that we all coalesced around. And one of the things that I did is create a style guide and a character Bible, and that's everything from like, this is how we use the Oxford comma in this game.
Yes. Sorry.
So, like,
just got me very excited.
Oh, good.
This game has some sick punctuation.
Yes.
Do it. It's
finally the game I've been waiting for my whole life.
Quotes in there, man.
Yeah, but we also had a whole discussion in one of our weekly writers meetings about like, well, does Lena swear? And that was one of the things that was really interesting for me when I started coming in with work that had been done by several different writers of several different backgrounds. You could see each writer's voice really clearly in each draft. Like, oh, this is our like droll British writer. This is our, writer who uses some more F-bombs than other writers. Like, so just figuring out like which one of those is right for Lena, and always bringing it back to the character.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. And I assume that must affect the art as well. That I'm stealing a question that Kyle VB has asked in chat.
Yeah.
That if the character has an old injury, sore muscles, that how that would affect then character design.
Yeah, and actually it's been an interesting challenge on this game in particular. I mean, it's been really fun. To go back a little bit into the development of the art style too, like I made mention that like, I had this portrait style that Patrick resonated with. And I think that the thing that we did try, even though we had that, we went, we spent a couple of weeks trying a couple of different styles. I mean, one of the games that we looked at that we really loved that as an inspiration for this game, and in terms of the structure, was something like Papers, Please. Papers, Please is such a fantastic game mechanically because, you're basically redoing the same action, but it never feels like the same action. And it's such a great, it had a similar rhythm where like our character has a job and the mechanics of doing that job and like driving, talking to people are the same each time, just like reviewing paperwork. And then that's where the game exists, is trying to fake you out. And in that game, you meet Papers, Please, you meet, hundreds of people. And the art style really suits that because, one, from a production standpoint, I imagine it's a little bit easier to accomplish. I'm making an assumption about that. But then number two is that it really complements the mechanic well because the people are very obscure looking and like very faceless. Like their identity is not very strong, and that really ties into the mechanic of reducing people down to bits of pieces of paper versus like actual human beings. So you're constantly fighting that tension, and I love the art style in that game for that reason. So why this art style seemed to work really well with our mechanic is that the whole game is about trying to relate to people and understanding, being able to read their face. Like, are they happy? Are they sad? Can I make that change? And we have a dynamic animation system where the characters all have ambient animations, but through the process of conversing with somebody, you can see that their emotion will change. They'll be, you might say something and they might turn shocked, or they might turn angry, or they might turn sad. And so we needed an art style that had really clear, easy to read features. And so my sort of graphic novel style that I use to illustrate people really fit that, because graphic novels are all about reducing complex characters and emotions down to very simple shapes. And so, but we did a pass where the style was very simplified and it just didn't feel right. Like you couldn't connect with the characters. And so the characters got more and more complex as time went on, which was great because then we can design very specific characters. And I'm really excited because our cast is pretty diverse. Like you meet a wide variety of men, women, people from different, racial backgrounds, people from different cultural backgrounds, people of different shapes and sizes. I'm always wanting to push it more, but I think we have a really good setup. But then the problem is the more detailed they get, the harder they are to develop. Because like, So it's sort of like, the strength of our game is that the characters are all so specific, but it does it does drag production a little bit. But the quality of the writing and like the uniqueness of each voice really deserves to have a character that matches that. And without it, if the characters were kind of bland looking, it just wouldn't feel right. I think that was, I hope that answers your question. But I think I lost my train of thought too. I got so excited about writing.
I'm on the train with you.
I think it all makes sense. I think it all comes together.
So I guess the thing is there's been an interesting tension, I think, between writing and art where like we're sort of like pushing each other forward. We just had a character that we've sort of tried to avoid some of the typical cyberpunk tropes of like a character with like a little visor, like, and or like, a half a robot face. But we do have a character with some cybernetics, and I won't say exactly what, and trying to design that in a way that felt plausible to our time period, that felt relatable, and really also evoked all the things that needed to be evoked about that character was really fun, but very challenging. And so sometimes we'll have a production conversation where we'll say, maybe they don't have, maybe they don't have crab claws because that's really difficult. Maybe they just have regular hands that are red or something like that. Sometimes there is a bit of a negotiation that goes back and forth. That's a terrible.
I'll never forgive you for not letting me write the crab claws.
If your crab claws, it's destroyed our friendship, the lack of crab claws.
We were actually going to call the game Neo Crab for a while.
Oh my god.
But
No.
That's just the subtitle now.
Yeah.
I know. Thanks, Vincent.
I know. Hey, we couldn't get the URL.
That's right.
Oh man. Anyway, so it is fun, but it is interesting having so many different writers and it's all the characters still filter kind of through me. So it's actually been really fun, but very challenging just to make sure that you do service to these characters. Yeah.
I'm really happy with where we landed, for what it's worth, on that slider between tons and tons of like somewhat procedurally like put together characters and a smaller number of very specific characters. I think we started out impossibly wanting both and had to eventually choose. And I 100% know we made the right call, which is we actually still have a huge cast for a team this size. I think it's 18.
It might be 20. It might be
20 now. Yeah, we've been which is insane.
It's around the area. But I think we were very ambitious at the beginning. But part of that I think is also you just don't quite know where the game's going to go. I think
exactly. Yeah, half the writing team was also still really interested in procedural content. Like literally, here's one ride script, but every time you do it, it's slightly different parameters, slightly different things, and ultimately it was the quality that made us steer away from that. We're just like, these are interesting stories, but they're not good stories the way that like an actual human crafted, character driven story.
Yeah. And I think that would have been an interesting version of the game, but it felt a little random too. Like where it's like, you can literally pick up anybody, and that's a crazy experience, and that's definitely true to life. If you talk to any Uber driver or Lyft driver, they're filled with stories that are wild in terms of their experience. But I think that would really help the game click together was sort of finding like the A story of the game and finding a purpose for all that, because we developed this motto really early on when we were developing the logo. Like we were thinking of like what mottos for the branding mottos for like the car company NeoCab could be, and the one that stood out to us was "Stay Human," and it's been sort of a mantra for us. Like our game is really about trying to maintain your humanity in sort of this like world that's moving in the opposite direction, and so focusing on a story that people could relate to, that had a narrative arc to it, became the most human thing that we could possibly do with this mechanic and this approach, and it really made things feel a lot better. And also like initially like we were thinking, oh, you'll meet somebody and you'll never see them again, and that's so much to throw out the window. You have to develop a whole character on the their voice and their background, and then also the visual look and the production of that. So, we now have like the notion that you will like see people over a couple of different fights. And that ended up working out great. So that's been really, really cool.
Yeah, so then you can build relationships. I really enjoy that not only is, when you see Stay Human, it's not about, oh no, robots are taking over, or some other kind of like futuristic story. It's about staying human in an increasingly tech-heavy future, which is super cool. Speaking of the tech, there is some tech hinted in the trailer and in some of the images that people might have seen about the game. How advanced is this tech, and how did you decide to design that stuff?
Question. I think we might be talking a bit about some of the holographic stuff here. One of the advancements, I guess that's clear from watching the trailer, from seeing some of our screenshots, is that our phones and our devices are like casting stuff out into the air in front of you. And like, I would say one thing that drove us to that is it seems plausible. Like there's some really interesting stuff going on with holography on like clouds of mist or like projector stuff. And a big thing for us is it was just a fun way to take the world of what's going on inside someone's phone. Because we're all like getting sucked into our phones now and cut out from each other. That's not easy to tell a story about. So early on, it was just like, well, if this character, we were writing people who were like, oh, they get sucked into their phone, and Lena notices that she's lost them. Like they were not talking to her, they're distracted. And I think that was probably the genesis of like, well, if, instead of like just looking at your phone, we can't see it. What if they're getting lost in sort of a cloud of information around their face? It just makes it much more interesting for storytelling. And so Vincent was able to prototype these 3D heads-up displays so that the player can actually see what the person is lost in. Is it like medical schematics? Is it some weird spyware? Is it,
It's sort of a, what do I want to say about it? I think part of it was just like, our game doesn't take place a crazy amount in the future. And I love sci-fi, but one thing that drives me a little nuts sometimes is when they say it's 30 years in the future and people are flying around on jetpack and robots are talking, and whereas like, and it just seems so far flung, and we could have done that, but I think that again, that sort of erases the relatability. Relatability was a huge touchstone for me, because I felt like if we had this character that was so far in the future, it would be really hard to relate to the really, really human stories we were telling.
Yeah, we're still living in a future where like video conferencing doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
How have we not solved this yet? I don't understand.
It will never be solved. Never.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think a lot of the tech just came from like trying to project outward, but then also giving it sort of a, I want to use the word junky look, like almost like a little bit of a, like Star Wars, right? Like Star Wars has such great production design, because everything looks worn and like sort of like functional. It's not like weird space magic, like Iron Man's heads-up display and everything is like space magic. It's like I think in the recent Avengers movie, he has like these nanobots, so his suit can then basically become anything. And so they've really stretched the bounds of what's plausible. But it works in that world because the world is crazy and fun. But for us, it just did seem, I wanted there to be some sort of grounding, even if I was pushing things farther. And also, I think, I think a lot of the heads-up displays too came from the idea about the fill grid. Patrick and I were talking about social media and how, what you're literally doing is you're taking your thoughts and you're putting them in a place where people can read them. And sometimes those thoughts are good, and sometimes those thoughts maybe you should have sat on for a little while. We're all dealing with this now of like, oh, I said this thing that I thought once, and maybe I shouldn't have said it, and now my whole life is ruined. And that's this is imagining a future where we're sort of beyond that, and it's almost like there's an even more immediate sensibility of like of feedback. Like Lena's fill grid is like her literally wearing her heart on her sleeve. Like it's not like she's the only one that can see it's red; her passengers can see it too. And so making the holographic displays, cleanly readable, serve two functions. One, the player can see what's happening, and so it enriches the story. And then two, it's like people don't care anymore about privacy. Almost doesn't even exist anymore. It's like, oh, if I'm gonna look at the web, you can see it too. Like, who cares? And it felt like a natural sort of progression from where we are.
I think there's a darker read on the feel grid as well, on that same note, where it's like, at this point when humanity and what makes us different from machines is getting like so like papered over and pushed aside, the feel grid where you're literally like, look, I'm angry right now, acknowledge my feelings, is like one last way to say my emotions matter and they need to be taken seriously. If I can literally show them to you, then maybe they'll be like the force in the world that they really should be.
Yeah, that's 100% true. It's like when Paula was just writing the in-game copy for the feel grid, like README essentially when you get it, and we're trying to capture that like Apple-y self-care techie voice. But yeah, that's the kind of dark side, is that we should be taking our own emotions and each other's emotions seriously now and sharing them with each other. And, you know, like how many people die of undiagnosed depression that they didn't tell anyone about. That might be just like, that's like a little bit of Black Mirror-ness of us, I guess, that the way people finally would take that seriously is because like, oh, I got a device that like tells me and tells other people how I'm feeling, because I can't do that myself. That's so
small digression, but we were really inspired when we were talking about the feel grid about the like Victorian mourning rituals, and just that way that they had like, I'm wearing all black, or I'm wearing like purple in later stages of mourning, that way of saying like, this is where I am in my world, I'm inhabiting a different space than you because I'm deeply in grief. And we thought that there was something kind of lovely about that. And I think that there is also, like the feel grid we were just talking about, like a darker kind of way of looking at it, that it's maybe constraining or something, but also just that legitimizing emotion, I think, is kind of the best intention of the feel grid.
Yeah. And it's kind of, it makes it almost, not performative, but yeah, it's more of a presence. It's harder. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's really cool. And I wouldn't have thought necessarily about the morning rituals, but as a big book nerd, that kind of book nerd, that strikes home. That's interesting. Tabs in chat also mentions that emotional labor. It clearly plays into that, because it makes it so much easier to do that, to get, take the time to be like, oh, I can totally see that you're upset right now. So it widens that door to take care of someone else's emotions, because you can figure out what they are.
It almost have to be a thing that Lena, somebody like Lena it benefits her to do that, just because if people are not used to dealing with humans anymore, like how do they interact, with each other? It's almost like, I think at one point we were talking about, like, Patrick and I were talking about, like, re-educating people, like, on how to interact with people, I think that's exactly what you're talking about, Paula, about the mourning period. It's like, it's a clear sign that, like, hey, here's what things are. Like, you have a choice to make.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because you don't, most of your passengers, there's someone else in the game who has a feel grid, but most of your passengers don't have them. And so in that sense, every ride has a little bit of an EQ test aspect to it, where you're trying to read their face and read their words and read between the lines to figure out what this person needs from you, because often you can't articulate it. And that's, to the question, like, that is the emotional labor that's involved across the service industry, is trying to sort of guess what this person really wants out of the ride. And in many cases, it's not just point A to point B, it's I want someone to listen, or I want someone to soak up my anxiety, etc.
And what does that cost to Lena?
Exactly.
And I'm glad that you tie it into like the current situation, because I feel like the best science fiction is, or like near future fiction provides a great opportunity for commentary on the present. And like we're like, some of the great feedback I've seen about the game is just that we're sort of already living in this world to a certain extent, like where we already are starting to fade away from this seeing each other as people, right?
Some of Lena's passengers, like, they kind of get in and you can tell they're like already not sure they should talk to her at all, right? Like, Is that part of the system? Are we supposed to talk to them?
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't there one ride where they like two passengers have a full conversation with like referring to Lena,
Ah!
something like that. It's just like gross, you know.
Yeah. But also very believable, I'm sure, to anyone who's ever driven a cab or Lyft or Uber. Yeah.
We have a great channel called Story Inspiration and also True Rideshare where we share these sorts of things. It's like every time there's a news item about Uber or Lyft, or anytime we have like an experience of meeting an interesting driver or having a rude fellow passenger, we share it there. And several rides that have come out of those.
Oh, that's so cool. Nice. Segueing ever so slightly, because I could talk about this forever, but I wanted to talk to, get you guys to talk a little bit about the game on sort of the coding side a little bit, or the nuts and bolts. And specifically, well, okay, here's a question I know. If it hasn't been asked yet here, it will be eventually, which is, what's the game made in?
Unity.
Boom! Yay! Everyone knows now.
We had all said Unity at the same time.
Oh!
I'm just like, Unreal. Wait, what? Seriously? I thought this was Unreal.
No.
What region was I in?
No, sorry. No.
I'm making it in Game Maker.
We're really collaborative. You can see we're all pulling in the same direction.
We're all going.
Okay.
But Andrew, I think
Media director.
we're doing a lot of interesting stuff on top of Unity that we haven't really talked about, and I think it would be cool to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we're using Unity, but we're also like the underlying narrative language we're using is Ink, which is popularized by Inkle Studios and a lot.
I'll
of
totally pretend like I already knew about that, and you didn't tell me what it was right before we started the stream today.
Yeah, it's just gonna fake it until you make it. Like that's what I'm doing every day. But we made this early decision to sort of base most of the game on the narrative script. So the writing of the game reads very similarly to a movie script, where our camera cuts, a lot of the puppeting that we do for the animations, a lot of the events that we do are all run through the same system, and it also runs all of the UI in the game, because we have a very unique challenge of writing an app within the game and making that feel responsive in this 3D world. In a technical environment, Unity, which isn't necessarily, you don't have a lot of the same tools that you would if you're, say, writing like a native phone app. So we made this early decision to sort of have the script, have the writing drive the bus on most of the game, and that's been actually very, very useful. It's allowed us to prototype the game very quickly. You can play most of the game just in sort of a text runner. We've had some automated testing things where we can sort of balance the game and fiddle with some of the knobs and levers without necessarily needing to build out everything in a full 3D engine. It's been tricky in some places, but ultimately I'm like very pleased with our decision to sort of move down that route.
That's awesome. And how big is the coding side of things, or rather the making of side of things?
I mean, there's a lot of lines of code.
Yeah, it's a big old game.
Yeah.
I think we're at 120,000 like lines now. It's something crazy like that. 120,000 words. Yeah, 120,000 words of ink code alone. Not to mention all the C# that like holds it all together. Yeah.
Nice. I'm a techno weenie, so my understanding of how games are actually made is pretty limited. But was there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about related to how the game is actually made?
Patrick, can you think of anything?
How the game is actually made. I mean, we've done just lots of really interesting things that I'm excited to talk about. You should definitely check out our dev blog if that kind of stuff interests you.
Yeah.
Joel put together a great post on his procedural city systems. So like that is one area of procedural content that is still in the game. Every time you kind of press play, you get a fresh route through Los Ojos. That's decorated with like a huge bunch of art assets that are combined in interesting ways.
We've also done a lot of work because the art style is mostly 2D, but we do have 3D elements, and so that's been a real technical hurdle to kind of get these 2D and 3D systems working together with the script. So you have a bunch of inputs into this system. You have the script, which is sort of driving the pace. You've got the city that Lena's moving through, which with like the turns and things that she has. You've got the animation system of her face that's semi-reactive and like not always directly scripted. We sort of
like her face mirrors the field grid. Like these things have to be one system, so like her animation is driven by that game.
Right. But so we have this mix between procedural events, and also we want to have that control where we can say, okay, this is what we want this moment to feel or look like to hit this emotional note or this narrative note. And it's been pretty tricky to try to thread the needle through all of that to make sure that at the high point of at the climax of this ride, you're not in the middle of like, she's not like in the middle of crying while she's turning her steering wheel, something like that.
Even though that would be very relatable.
Yeah. Turning while crying is actually the subtitle. That was the second. That was what we were going to do.
That's gonna be our emo band.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is an emo band.
But yeah, I mean, there are parts of the game that are dynamic. There are parts of the game that are heavily authored, and so I think that's been the real interesting part about putting the game together is how we tie those two together and make it feel like alive. And I mean that's kind of how that intersection really makes the characters feel more lifelike, or we're hoping they do, because it's if everything's so authored, then it starts to feel a little stiff, and everything's so too dynamic, they don't feel reactive. So it's our game's trying to live within those boundaries, within that gray zone in between the two of them.
Yeah. Oh, and that reminds me, we also did a lot of cool like cinematography reference. Like, so a lot of the in the ride experience, which most of the game takes place in, there's I think 8 or 9 camera angles that are possible. There's
something like that.
That we switch between, and like we collected all these great, or like Vincent made storyboards, informed by lots of great classic like movies, Taxi Driver or Collateral or
Drive or
Night on Earth.
Night on Earth.
Night on Earth is a Jim Jarmusch movie, if no one knows it, and it's a great film. It's almost like our game in a way, because which is crazy. We didn't know about it until after like about 2.
We're like 6 months in, and then we're like,
I was like, remember this movie? It's a really cool movie where it's like focuses on one city, one driver, and one passenger on one night, and it'll do Los Angeles, and then go to have one story, and then end and go to New York, and go to another story. It's really, really cool. But like, there are some great camera angles that I was able to study from that and all the other films that Patrick had mentioned. And we early on in the process, we were trying to figure out what the game looks like and how we stage everything and produce all the artwork to have all those camera cuts. We took a few of Paula's scripts and literally storyboarded them out. I created like 9 or 10 different shot variations, and then ran them through the script, and we were able to read them storyboard wise to figure out like, okay, well maybe we need an extra shot here, or maybe we don't need this shot.
Yeah.
That really helped us plan out the game. It's
Vincent also got Tiff to like sit in his car and like shot everything with a camera just to get like the different depth of fields right and everything.
Oh wow.
My friend, because the lighting, I really wanted the lighting to feel really good and sort of authentic. So my friend Tiff Chow, who's a game designer and was the original reference for Lena, I had her over to my house, and my wife and I had set up like a car with like studio lights, and we took a bunch of reference photos and like moved the lights around her face, and that really helped inform like the different lighting angles. And so it was just like setting up like a little mini set, and that was really informative just to figure out like what when a light is passing overhead, like how much should that look like, and how does the character's like hands look when they're like seated on like a steering wheel, like just really get that. We did a lot of like research to make it feel right. It's funny, I not like I forgot that we did that, Patrick. I just maybe forgot that we did that. A good part of the first half of development was figuring out how we are going to do our characters and how to actually just represent the car and do multiple cuts. It took a long time to really get right, and so we're pretty happy with where it's at.
Yeah,
a lot of research and reference. Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, we've talked a lot about NeoCab, and we're pretty much out of time. So, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. Patrick, Paula, Vincent, and Andrew, thank you very much for joining me today to give us a lot of really amazing behind-the-scenes little sneak peeks into what's going on with the game right now and how it's being made. That said, that's certainly not all there is to know, so you're definitely going to want to keep an eye. I posted in the chat, and I will post again, that if you're interested in NeoCab and want to stay up to date on what's going on behind the scenes and, when the game's gonna be coming out and little things like that, news and updates like that will be coming down the line. So you might want to wishlist the game on Steam or follow NeoCab at NeoCab Game on Twitter. And get all of those details. I also posted the dev blog link in there so you can get even more cool nitty-gritty behind-the-scenes stuff all up in your biz. And
if there's any questions that we didn't get to or you want more detail on, I think Twitter is probably the best way. If you just mention NeoCab Game, we'll all see it in our Slack and the best person from the team.
Yeah. Also, definitely follow the Fellow Traveler channel here, whether you're watching us on Twitch or on Mixer. We are aiming to be doing a weekly show with any and all and many of the devs that we are working on to bring really awesome games out to you. So be sure to follow so you know when we're doing that, because there's more like this to come. We're going to close here today with the trailer that is already out there for NeoCab, so you can get a little bit of a look at some gameplay. And thank you, everybody, so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, everyone, let's wave all synchronized at the camera like cool people. Bye.